This is the Fifth Estate winning headlines, your media police post, coming to you from the Fort Hall School of Government from Nairobi, Kenya. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning. But we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 24th of January 2020, and I am 2J.
I am Tom.
And I am GK, and in case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, there's plan to send me back to The Hague. In the Star, how 147 soldiers were massacred in El Ade. And in the Standard, Raila, my big fight with RUTO.
Yes.
So again, common denominator, the man of the hour,
Yes.
RUTO. But let us begin with an interview I'm sure most of us watched
last night.
last night on NTV. In the Daily Nation, there is a plan to send me back to The Hague.
Yes.
So an interview was held with Ken Mijingu.
Ijungu.
Yes, apologies. And he sat with our deputy president in what was termed the
Hustler
Hustler's
Mansion, yeah.
which is catching on. And a lot of things came out.
Yes.
Some obvious, some not so obvious. The obvious ones were that there's some people in State House who are trying to block
The DP.
the DP's bid for the next election.
Yes.
And there's been that obvious frustration.
Yeah.
But he also spoke about BBI.
Yes.
We're still not clear what his thoughts are on BBI. However, he did point out that Raila is using these rallies as a way to sort of be a platform for his election
Yes.
bid. And also that these rallies are being used to divide the political class.
Right.
Some people were invited, some were not invited. But in Mombasa this weekend, they are all going to be
Yes.
there.
Present,
Whether the deputy president was to be present, he stayed mum on that.
You know, there is one thing that shocked me.
Yes.
And this was at the beginning of the interview. So he was asked about the Kenya pipeline story. And says, oh yeah, I knew that was coming, but there's something else coming. And he says, at the tail end of last year, he met the Director General of NIS. And the DG told him, this General Camero told him that there is a plan. This was according to William Ruto. That there is a plan to actually resuscitate the ICC cases. And that, to me, was a banger. And I think he wanted someone to hear that claim. And that person, his audience, was none other than the President of the Republic of Kenya.
But let's take a step back.
Yeah.
Is ICC a possible strategy?
Oh, yes.
On behalf of?
Oh, yes.
It is a possible
So their
strategy,
cases are...
Because when they made the withdrawal statement, it actually stated in it, this withdrawal is without prejudice to the possibility of bringing new charges against, it was both Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto, at a later date, based on the same or similar factual circumstances, should the prosecution obtain sufficient evidence to support such a course of action.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in other words, he's telling the president, I know your scheme. And
he has the same one as well.
He has the same one as well, but who has a monopoly of violence? Who has the instruments of power? It is Uhuru Kenyatta.
Telling the president.
I am sure.
According to DP, him and the president still have their current bromance. Although
he said we're not married.
Yes, they have their respective spouses.
Exactly.
However, I don't know whether we could say it was a...
Never in the history of a deputy president from 2013 until now has he had a 2-hour interview. He needed to have time to vent, and his audience was not Kenyans. He wanted to address the head of state.
Exactly, because I think that was the only course of action for him, with the current frustrations. However, I will say, I was expecting more juicy, stuff.
Yeah.
By the time you're going to do an interview, a surprise interview live on a Thursday night, I was expecting more.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think Ken Mijungu was dealing with power distance dynamic.
That's true.
He was dealing with a nation who wants a lot of answers,
yes,
but also with an institution that is the deputy president.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
it was
good headline,
interesting
though.
stuff.
Absolutely.
Well, we do have a 3-part criteria that we use to break down the headline. We ask ourselves, is it topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking?
Yeah.
And is it thoughtful or just plain lazy?
Yes.
So there we go. I quite like it.
I like it as well.
I was intrigued.
Yes.
And it is topical.
Yes.
In the Star.
Yes.
How 147 soldiers were massacred in El Ade.
Let me tell you, before I analyze this.
Or before we toss it, rather.
Before we toss it. This is a rubbish piece by the Star. And it is rubbish because you do not say, even if it's true, you do not put dead soldiers and the number that they were on a headline. And this is a thing that something like the New York Times they actually say that when Manda Bay was attacked, our soldiers were hiding
in bushes,
in the grass.
Yeah.
I will have such a bad word to call them, but I will not call them. But this is useless. You cannot put dead soldiers on a headline. This is your national army, for goodness sake.
Well, listen, they didn't die in vain. That number sticks in everyone's head.
However, what the problem is that it's a bit misleading, because this was not celebrating, or rather remembering the 4th anniversary of when this attack happened.
Yes.
So I think pulling this out of the archives 4 years later is
Here they have said how 147 KDF soldiers were mowed down in Elade.
Yeah, no, it's disrespectful.
This is disrespectful. This is your national army.
Yeah.
So
you are behaving like those miscreant people from New York Times who tell us, and we are guarding their soldiers.
On that note, we will toss
the star, most definitely.
I'm very upset. In the Standard, Raila, my big fight with RUTO.
It's a strong headline, yeah. So in this story, they talk about how Raila said that his differences with RUTO are ideological about the future of Kenya. How they've, over the course of the years, have had differences. He talks about the Mao conservation and the 2010 constitutional reform as things that they had difference of opinions over.
Yeah.
And that the basic fundamentals that hinge on the best decision for the country, they just don't seem to agree.
Yeah.
Not much of a story, I would say. I think it's a strong headline, but a boring story.
So but it's coming after him, Raila meeting with
senators.
Kenya.
Yes, exactly.
Yes,
that's true.
He met with senators and businessmen. Uhuru Kenyatta last week met with 24 governors. What is my point here? You see, William Ruto does not understand that this is a game of what you call marginal returns. Now, if you're going to pass a referendum in this country, there's a minimum threshold, and that is only 20% of 24 counties. That's all you need to pass a referendum at the lowest level. Now, if Uhuru Kenyatta met 24 governors last week for lunch in Mombasa, Raila Odinga is beating senators and businessmen. The end game here for them, they just want the minimum returns, marginal returns to be able to pass BBI. That is it. So if William Ruto still thinks that by going to Mombasa will botch BBI, I don't think that's what the end game is. End game is at the lowest level of where the referendum will pass.
Yeah. So between the two headlines, what do we think?
I go with the Daily Nation.
Yeah, me too. I would agree.
There you have it. So
we toss the standard.
Yeah.
There you have it. Daily Nation gives us our winning headline. On to the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country, where we also have a 3-part criteria that we use. We ask ourselves, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And is it effective?
Or just plain
just plain lazy? Stop quizzing us, please.
No, you have to keep you on your toes. Okay, so we have Gado
in the standard.
Yes. And this is the Cameroonian president, Paul Biya. He's in hospital here, and this is very clever, although it's a sad state. Now the machines around him, one is reading tribalism. You know the way those things read: tribalism, corruption, chronism, incompetence.
Yeah,
I think it's very
it's a smart cartoon. I like it.
Yeah, but also saying, I mean, now this guy is so old. I mean,
he's 86 years old.
86 years old, and he's
he's an absentee president, because I believe he's sick. His health is ailing. I think it's a good cartoon.
Yes.
And as we say, Gado is our international cartoonist, and I think he likes to bring a lot of what's happening regionally back.
But Biya has been in power since 1982, since before you were born.
Well, so has Prince Philip, right?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
All right, let's put it in the parking bay. Let's look at the Daily Nation.
Lord, you had to go there.
This is a caricature of Chief Justice David Maraga, and he's pulling Mkokoteni, and Uhuru Kenyatta is the one on that walk. He's being carried by Mkokoteni, sitting pretty. There he has something that looks like a fish rod, and he's dangling a note on Maraga's bowling ball. And the caption there is a begging bowl, actually. And the caption there from Maraga is, "I need a budget." And Uhuru is saying, "I need convictions."
I think these are fantastic.
Everybody needs something. But it's coming off yesterday's president's speech at the judiciary.
Absolutely.
Where they sort of went back and forth. But they seem to be making some ground towards coming to some...
Maybe he got the car
halfway point.
I think he got the car he was looking for.
He got but he was told his budget, same. You just work it out.
But something was very interesting. Uhuru Kenyatta, as was reading the speech, he kept saying, he Nikali, he Sitasoma. Meaning that they could have had a handshake before the speeches began. And they had some agreement. And these two now seem to be getting along. And if I was actually guys on the Tanga side, I would be very scared.
Yeah. But what worries me is that the judiciary is meant to be independent, right?
Yeah.
And if we're saying that the CJ is saying that he needs money and he's not going to act until he gets money, and the president is saying, I'm not going to give you money until you give me convictions. I mean, what?
It's like a quid pro quo.
Yeah.
And a catch-22.
And a catch-22, but that's not how it should be.
Separation of powers.
Yeah. But it's a good cartoon. I think it's great.
I agree.
Lastly.
Pocket.
This is caricature of Raila Odinga with a battery pack behind him on his back. And they look like Duracell cells. And one battery cell is called Handshake, the next is called BBI. And the caption there is re-energized, a man enjoying the trappings of power.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed Ozone, you know, as we've gone into the year.
Yeah.
But he's fallen asleep
today.
Such a lazy cartoon.
But guys, let me ask, 2017, 3 years later from 2017, who would have thought that Raila Odinga would be in this position?
Yeah.
Jesus, he looks like the second in command.
Yeah, but he's a master politician. I expected this.
You know, by the time William RUTO, he was saying yesterday, HAGUE should actually release the schedule of BBI so that we can know. That is, this is the deputy president asking
for a
HAGUE
schedule.
for a schedule.
Yeah. Okay. Who would have thought? Okay, I will say, conversation good, cartoon not so much. Oh, 2M. You're angering some people behind the camera today.
Who do we give it to? Okay, there you go. Daily Nation, Dula gives us a winning cartoon.
Yes.
What is our final thought?
Our final thought. It is inspired by a book my grandmother would throw away. And it is called The Origins.
You have to start it like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, my grandmother would throw it away because she knows God created us all.
All right.
And the book is called The Origins of Species by Charles Darwin.
Yeah. So the actual full title is On the Origin of Species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life.
I do want to say.
Before you guys go there, may I please give a summary?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
1 second. So on Monday, we looked at The Professor and the Madman by Simon Winchester.
Yes.
A tale of murder, insanity, and the making of the Oxford English Dictionary.
Yeah.
And how a madman who had murdered someone ended up helping put together all these thousands of words in the English dictionary.
Yeah.
And by sending his contributions to Professor Murray, showing us that there can be a fine line between madness and genius almost.
Yes.
On Tuesday, we looked at Rumblines and Map Wars by Marc Monmonier.
Yes.
A social history of the Mercator projection.
Yes.
And here we evaluated the ideological and political value of maps as we know them. We saw how the Peters map came up as a response to the first map in order to show a map that was fair to all people and areas and nations. And we saw how maps can be used to reinforce misperception.
Yes.
And then on Wednesday, we looked at the Bible's cutting room floor by Dr. Joel Hoffman.
Yes.
The Holy Scriptures missing from your Bible.
Yeah.
Writings left out, sometimes due to theological or even political reasons, but sometimes just due to space.
Yes.
So they couldn't put everything in there.
Yeah.
And on Thursday, we looked at Plato and his argument on rule by the philosopher king and realizing that the journey to truth must be very deliberate.
Yes.
And today we are looking at
the origin
may have come from
species, by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life, written by Charles Darwin in 1859.
Yes.
So Darwin, I'm sure we all know, was a naturalist whose scientific theory of evolution by natural selection became the foundation of modern evolutionary studies.
Yes.
So Darwin's theories at first shocked a lot of the Victorian society at that time because he suggested that animals and humans shared a common ancestry.
Yes.
Maybe that's why your grandmother would not like this book. So Darwin formulated his theory after returning from a 5-year voyage around the world. So for 5 years he was on this ship, going to different islands, picking up fossils and different matter. So natural selection is a key component of Darwin's theory. Much of it was inspired by the Malthusian theory of population growth, which was argued by Thomas Malthus. So the Malthus theory argues or suggests that if left unchecked, population will outgrow its resources, leading to a lot of problems. So that's why we talk about sometimes birth control and those other kinds of things. So Darwin borrowed from this, and he argued that the possibility of infinite growth of population sizes is checked by the limits of geography and natural resources, which will not allow an infinite number of beings to survive. So as a result, with limited water, resources, shelter, food, and so on, species must engage in what he calls the struggle for existence, creating a competition for survival. That's where we get that phrase, survival of the fittest. So natural selection then decides which species will survive and which will become extinct. So Darwin argued that organisms exhibiting advantageous variations that allow them to adapt better to their natural environment are more likely to survive to those that cannot adapt to their natural environment. And so through hereditary, these advantageous variations will be passed on to their offspring. So you have a child and you pass on those advantageous things. And these will eventually, through natural selection, allow species which are best adapted to their environments to survive. And those who cannot, through the struggle of natural selection, will eventually become extinct.
You know, as much as she would not like this book, my grandmother, I secretly like it.
Okay. Is she watching?
I don't know. However, he speaks about, in this book, and this is still now natural selection, how whales came to be. So he had, in his earlier publications, he had said that whales were actually formed through a land mammal. And this land mammal was a black bear. And the black bears actually used to come from land, go to sea, and they would open their mouths and eat insects. Like, and then they try and catch insects with their, you know.
Don't try and eat me.
Do I look like a bear?
You just opened your mouth.
So they would try and catch insects and eat them.
All right.
Now, slowly by slowly, he got ridiculed by people, by scientists. And they say there's absolutely no way a black bear would have become a whale. And but somehow scientists still believed that there was a process and a method as how whales came to be. Now, what I did, I actually went and looked at how the whales came to be. Yes. And allow me to read how they became, how they came to be.
Okay.
So the first animal before a whale was called a Synonyx, and it looked like a hyena. All right.
Okay.
Then over 60 million years after evolution started kicking in, there came an animal called an Indo-Hyas. It looked like a rat. Right?
Wait.
Now,
from a hyena to a rat.
To a rat.
Okay.
All right.
60 million.
A huge rat.
Yes.
A huge rat. Now, from a rat, there was an animal called Ambulocetus, which looked like an aardvark. It had a long snout and a big body, like very long. All right. Now, from that came an animal called the Rhodoccetus, which looked like a Komodo dragon. Have you seen a Komodo dragon?
Yeah,
a Komodo dragon.
Yeah, it kind of looks like it's like a reptile, kind of like a crocodile.
Yes,
like a big lizard.
And a big lizard, and it has like all manner of crazy things in its mouth. It has like deadly bacteria. And after this Rhodoccetus was an animal called the Basilosaurus. It looks like a lizard fish. All right. Then from then on was an animal called the Durodon, which was a large snouted dolphin.
Yeah.
And guys, as I'm saying this, I want you to picture these
I know
animals.
Because I'm understanding. How did we go from a hyena
to
a?
Yes.
Okay.
But this is over a period of 60 million years, right? And then finally, from the largest snouted dolphin to what we call today the modern humpback whale.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Oh my goodness, you did some extensive research there.
And the other times?
Yeah. If survival depended on how he was saying the names, I don't think you would be alive.
Dr. Tuam.
Please move.
So the things I think we can deduce from the origin of the species are about maybe 3 or 4 things. I'll mention about some of them. So that the world is full of constant change. And the most basic aspect of the theory of evolution is that life is not stagnant. So picture a flock of birds flying past. What you're seeing is actually a snapshot in the history of time. Those birds could have been something completely different 10,000 years ago, which is what you were talking about in terms of that evolution
progression
over time, right? And in 10 years, many will have died, blah, blah, but they wouldn't have changed so much. But they could change the color of their feathers, and things keep changing. And then the other thing we can take away, what you had previously mentioned, is that we may have a common ancestor. Now this is both controversial but also somehow accepted. Controversial because humans don't like to think of themselves as coming from the same ancestor as other creatures. We want to have that privileged lineage. And this is something that Darwin sort of struggled with convincing science for a very long time. And so he argued that creatures came from one or very few
Yes.
sources,
Right.
but nobody else has ever been able to sort of increase or build on that knowledge.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is that inheriting change across species. So
Yeah.
if we think of giraffes,
Yes.
Darwin would have argued that long necks came from they came from
Is it
how do I put it?
crocodiles?
Not crocodiles.
Or black bears.
So that an animal adapted over time and got
Yes,
the long,
neck, exactly.
right? What is happening today?
Yeah.
Guys, Darwin is complex. Even as I'm reading this,
Exactly, because they had to adapt the long neck to reach the leaves of the trees that were high
to
above,
eat, right?
Yes,
And so Darwin's theory says that within a population, change occurs as the new balance of the new inherited traits spread across a population.
Yeah.
And so how a new species comes about is also still up for debate.
Yeah.
Because were you born with a long neck as a giraffe, or
Yeah.
did you evolve over time to get
develop
the
that
long
long
neck
neck,
because of your environment?
Yes.
So lots of nurture versus nature,
Yes.
conversations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
There you go.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
book.
everyone should read it.
Yes. I'm still not convinced about this bear to whale story.
Story, we will look
I don't
it
know
up.
which book you were reading.
It's in the book. It's in the book. It's
So
in the
on
book.
a day, guys, where we had a double win from the Daily Nation, winning headline, winning cartoon, I want to leave you with this. In the end, it is not just the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is adaptable to change.
Absolutely.
I feel like that message could also go out to William Ruto.
Crickets.
All right. Have a good weekend. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and also find us on TV. We're on Pan Free to Air, Go TV, and Star Television.